Welcome to the In Love with PMDD podcast. I am your host, Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist, and I help you stop the monthly PMDD breakups. PMDD is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is in approximately 1 in 5 women, and it makes you want to break up with your partner approximately 1 to 2 weeks before your period every single month. So as someone who has suffered with PMDD for over 18 years, I dedicated my doctorate practice to helping partners navigate those monthly PMDD breakups with everything from attachment styles, triggers, sensitivity to noise, sensitivity to touch, all of the things that you really struggle with when you're in PMDD. And I also dedicated my dissertation to a phenomenological study of the relationship experiences of partners of individuals who suffer with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So I'm not just here to help the sufferer, the one who is suffering with PMDD. I am here for the partners as well. So if you need those private sessions, make sure you go to inlovewithpmdd.com and get those tools. So let's get into this week's PMDD Trauma Transformational Tools that is going to help you stop the monthly breakups and stop the suffering and stress in your PMDD relationship. Let's get into it.
So, like I said, today we have a special guest. Her name is Rose Alkattan. Rose is a PMDD relationship expert who has suffered with PMDD for over 16 years. It's so awesome because Rose is currently getting her doctorate and she's specializing her research and writing her dissertation in PMDD partnerships. She is the host of the In Love with PMDD podcast. And on her podcast, she shares her PMDD Trauma Transformation Tools to help PMDD partners navigate their intimate relationships and stop their monthly breakups. So this episode of the podcast is a little bit longer than normal, but that's because I have multiple clients currently that have PMDD. And listen, I know that there are many, many more women out there that are suffering with PMDD and have no idea that there is a name to what they're experiencing or that there's help available for them. So I've done an episode on the difference between PMS and PMDD in the past, and I'm going to throw the link to that episode in the show notes. But in the episode, I talk about the criteria that you have to meet in order to be diagnosed with PMDD. But I wanted to have Rose come on and really share her personal experience with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and how it affects her relationships and how she copes with it. So just a side note, in this episode, Rose refers to something called the DSM. And the DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So this is really the standard classification of mental disorders that's used by mental health professionals in the United States. Also, in the show notes, I'm going to be putting the link to Rose's Instagram so you can connect with her there. Her Instagram is so fun. She's very, very active on her Instagram and shares so many valuable tools there. And I'm also going to put the link in the show notes where you can sign up to receive her 10 ways to manage your PMDD rage in your relationship. One last thing before we jump into this conversation. If you know somebody who suffers with extreme PMS or PMDD, please will you share this episode with them? Okay, here's my conversation with Rose. Hi, Rose. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here and I'm excited to talk to you. Before we dive in, I always like to do a little cycle check-in with my guests. And so do you mind telling us what day of your cycle you're on and what your experience of this day is?
Yes, so I'm on day 31. I am on the last day of my cycle. So hopefully my period should be here tomorrow. I'm really, really hoping because having PMDD, we look forward to that day so much. So It's like the final countdown. So I'm like, okay, you know, PMDD for me is normally 14 days. So I'm on my 14th day of PMDD. So I'm on the tail end of it.
Yes. Okay. This is so... Oh, I've got so many questions for you. This is going to be a juicy conversation. And I think there's a lack of knowledge about PMS like the difference between PMS and PMDD. And I think a lot of women think that they might be crazy or whatever. And so there's just so many things I want to ask you. Before we get into it, will you tell us a little bit about you and your story and what brought you to this point and all the wonderful work you're doing in the world?
Of course. So I have had PMDD for over 16 years now. And I originally didn't know that I had PMDD. I knew that I had, like you said, PMS symptoms from in the beginning of my, my childhood. Like when I first got my cycle, I knew that I had like a little bit of mood swings, but I believe that the PMDD really happened for me like a couple of years before I had my daughter. So my daughter is turning 13, and I remember when I was trying to conceive and I was, coming off of birth control, really paying attention to my hormones and my cycle because I was trying to have a baby. So I was very like, okay, when is my period? When is this? And so what I was noticing is a shift in my mental health, a shift in my emotional health outside of, the norm. I was like, this cannot be normal. And so when I started looking it up, it really didn't give me the answer that, immediately you have PMDD. My doctor even said, oh, you just have PMS, just get on birth control. And she was trying so many different kinds, high estrogen, low estrogen. I was on all of them. And I felt like I was just getting the side effects, like more and more side effects. I was breaking out. I was having weight gain. I was like, I need to clear this from my body because I feel like all I'm getting is the after effects. But I feel like outside of the birth control, I want to see what this feels like in my body. Like, what am I experiencing outside of this? Because it would have been so easy to say, oh, I'm having these symptoms because of, the birth control and the hormones that they're putting in my body. But when I finally took the hormones out of my body, meaning like I'm taking these extra hormones out from birth control, I was still having the symptoms. And I was like, I did feel crazy. I'm like, you know what? This is not normal, And the thing that made me realize that I had PMDD and why I focused so much on relationships is because I broke up with so many of my partners. Like that was like a common theme for me. And I was literally engaged a couple of times. Like my friends used to call me like the runaway bride because I was just like engaged, and then I'd be like, I can't do this. I'm out of here. And I'm like, what is wrong? Because it wasn't always the other person's actions. It was like normal things when I would like talk to my friends about it. They're like, yeah, that's kind of what happened in relationships. And I'm like, no, like it was so extra for me. And I struggled with this so much. And so when I realized that I had PMDD and I was going into my educational journey, I have a lot of childhood trauma. So I was originally going to get my doctorate in that, so I was like, okay, I'm going for my doctorate practice. Let me do childhood trauma. But then I looked in the literature just one day when I was doing research, and I was like, man, there's nothing in here for PMDD specifically on relationships. And it was very little for PMDD period because, it just got added to the DSM in about 2013. So it's very new. Not even doctors, a lot of the doctors that I have, they said when they went to school, this wasn't even in the text. So it's really not their fault that they don't have the answers, because unless they're doing annual training of some sort, when they had to get their doctorate, it wasn't in there. It wasn't a requirement. So how would they even know how to help someone if they practice for years and they come to you with these symptoms? They automatically say, what's the closest thing to PMDD? And then they said, oh, there's two things. So it's PMS or it's bipolar, right? Because I always talk about how I'm completely fine, once I have my cycle, but then when I don't have my cycle, I feel like a lunatic, and they're like, oh yeah, so you're probably bipolar, here, take these meds. And I'm very cautious about what I put in my body because I feel like I'm very sensitive to whatever the side effects are. It seems like for some reason I get like all of them. So I have to be very careful about what I take. And so I'm like, well, I don't feel like I'm bipolar. I started to research it more. And I said, you know what? It's, when I figured out that it was PMDD, I said, I'm switching my doctorate from childhood trauma into this study because this needs to be in the literature. And even my dissertation chair was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, it's going to be way harder because you have to relate your dissertation on past literature. So if there's no past literature there, you're basically making it harder for yourself because you're having nothing to bounce it off of.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow. That's amazing. You're incredible for doing that. Like, you're a pioneer in this work.
Thank you.
So awesome. So I want you to talk about the difference, but because I think, when I talk to my clients about PMDD, they're like, yeah, I've heard of it. It's just a really bad case of PMS.
Yeah.
And I'm like, let's talk more about that. And you are somebody that experiences it. So I want you to just shed so much light on this. I mean, I've done an episode here on the podcast about PMDD and the kind of the criteria that are, but what is the difference between PMS and PMDD, and how would a woman know if that's what she's experiencing?
The way I always describe the difference between PMS and PMDD is PMS is more of a discomfort, whereas PMDD is more of a distress, meaning you are feeling like you're so desperate you don't even know if you want to live. The suicidal ideations was the main thing for me, that I'm like, okay, there's no way that this is supposed to happen on a monthly basis where I'm questioning my existence because of these symptoms, where I remember having PMS, like before I had PMDD, I had discomfort, and it was, so I never try to take away from PMS, because sometimes it's like this, like, oh no, PMS is really uncomfortable. And I'm like, I know it, it's an inconvenience. It's not fun.
Sure.
It also doesn't make you question things like your sanity, right? It's the big part about PMDD is the intrusive thoughts. It's the mental mind games that you have. You don't know what's real and what's not. And I feel like with PMS, it's like you have these physical symptoms, like you have the bloating, you have the mood swings where you could be irritable in that way, but it's not like you're lashing out like in PMDD rage, where you're wanting to lash out at someone and do things that are so out of character. Everything that I did when I had PMS was pretty much in line with my character, the core of who I was. It was like I could be a little bit moody and a little bit snappy, but that's the extent of it, right? When I have PMDD rage, it's like a completely different person. It's completely out of character, because I feel like I'm such a nice, happy, high energetic person. And then when I get into PMDD, I feel low and depressed, and like this evilness kind of comes over me, to where when I'm outside of PMDD and I'm looking back, it's like I'm looking at a different person. It doesn't even seem like me. It doesn't even seem like anything that I would do, anything that I would say, but I've had partners mirror it to me. So I think that's why relationships are so important, because they literally tell you, no, you acted this way towards me, and you said this to me, and you kind of have that mirror on a day-to-day basis. And you're like, no, that's not me. You disassociate those two personas. Whereas PMS, if someone told me that I was snappy or irritable at them, I would be like, yeah, you're probably right. Like, I was having a bad day. I didn't feel good. And I felt okay with that. Like, I could accept that I was a little bit snappy or moody because I was uncomfortable because I was going through PMS.
Rose coaches other women that have PMDD on their relationships.
Yes.
Do you work with women in a one-on-one setting or in a group? How does that work?
So I work with PMDD Partners. So I work with the individual that suffers with PMDD, and then I also work with their partners who don't have PMDD. So depending on their preference, I do one-on-one sessions with the sufferer who has PMDD, and then one-on-one sessions with their partner. And then we combine it together and do a couple sessions together, because I find that when they're trying to get their point across, a lot of things can trigger the other person. So I don't want to have them in mutual settings where they feel like they can't just be open and say, how they're feeling, because they're constantly thinking about what their partner is, thinking. So they're kind of like underlying it a little bit. So I do both. And the sessions are very in-depth because everybody has different triggers, and whatever triggers you have, it always comes up during PMDD. So I make sure that we kind of get an outline and address those triggers, so that moving forward, the triggers may not go away, but I teach you how to manage them.
Okay. So let's talk about triggers for a minute. So that's different for every woman?
Yes.
There's a criteria in order to be diagnosed, have the official diagnosis of PMDD. But do you feel like most women read that and they're like, yep, that's me? Like, do you feel like most women know that they have, even you knew that you had something more than PMS?
Yes. So I feel like when you see the criteria and you put the pieces of the puzzle together, because, so out of all the criteria for PMDD, you may not have all of those symptoms, right? You may have some of them. So it's not required that you have all of them. You just have to have a certain number of them in consecutive with a time frame of it's before your period. Mm-hmm. And I feel like when people see that list, they're like, oh yeah, like they're like, oh, you only have to have 5 of these during this time. And you're like, I pretty much have 10. So it's confirmation because you're seeing the listing of things that you feel on a day-to-day basis when you're in PMDD. And it's something that people don't think that are combined together, anxiety, depression, the weight gain because you're fluctuating with your appetite changes and the rage and the irritability and all of these things that you're having consecutively is what makes you know that it's PMDD, because it's not like one day you're depressed and then one day you have anxiety and then one day you have insomnia. It's like you may have all of that within one day when you have PMDD for the whole day.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you walk us through your cycle a little bit? Like, what is your experience of your menstrual cycle? Because we talk a lot here on the podcast about the 4 phases of this menstrual cycle. And so you can use all the lingo with us. We know it all. So if you can just tell us like what your experience is like.
So when I say if y'all started at my menstrual cycle. So when I'm in my menstrual cycle, like day 1, which is going to start for tomorrow for me, that's when I start what I call PMDD recovery. And what that means for me is I'm recovering from having PMDD for those 14 days. And not only do I have the normal period things where you have the cramping and the things like that going on, but whatever happened in that PMDD cycle, I'm now having to repair the damage from that. So if I had extreme insomnia and I haven't gotten sleep within like 10 days because I haven't been able to, like, I'm recovering from that. So I know my partner always says, he was like, I feel so bad for you because you come out of these 14 days of PMDD, you feel better because you don't have it, but now you have all of these physical symptoms. So he's like, I feel like you really just don't get a break because I go through that whole, I would say I won't feel like myself until probably day 4 or 5 of my menstrual cycle. Like when my cycle's getting light and it's almost gone, because now I don't have the cramping. I don't have like, the clots and stuff. I don't have the back, the back pain, my body aches, and all of those things. And then the PMDD symptoms, have subsided because sometimes it overlaps, meaning I'm still having a little bit of the PMDD symptoms even while I'm having my cycle, which is, horrible. But by day 4 or 5, I kind of start to feel like myself. And then that is when I go into my follicular phase and I'm back to myself. I'm very high energy. I'm ready to get a lot of stuff done. If I've been disassociating with people, I'm trying to contact them, like be more social. And I'm ready to just go out there and feel like myself. And that normally lasts 14 days. I'll go through that process and I'm feeling good and I'm getting a lot done. And then when I go into PMDD, day 1 of 14, that is the big shift. That is the crash. And it's because I'm so high up from feeling so good that when it hits me that PMDD started, it's like a big drop on a roller coaster. You're just like, whoa, like what is going on? Like it'll literally hit me, unfortunately, in the middle of the night. So like I'll go to sleep feeling good, normal day to day, and I'll wake up with night sweats. Wow. So I wake up with night sweats. I know that, and sometimes I'm having such a good time and my life seems so normal that and if I don't pay attention and track my cycle and I'm expecting it's horrible because it shocks me. It scares me a little bit because I'm waking up, I'm like, I'm hot, literally like I can wring out my shirt. Wow. And it'll be drenched. I have really bad nightmares. So they're like night terrors. And then I can't go back to sleep that night. And I get up in the morning and my heart is racing and I'm filled with anxiety. And I literally feel like I look at myself in the mirror when I go to do normal things like brush my teeth or take my vitamins. And I don't even recognize myself. It's like a part of me is gone. My partner literally says, I look different. Like he's like, I look at you and it's like something in your eyes. Like, it's just like something's not there. And I'm going through the motions, but I'm not feeling like myself at all. I feel like somebody just took something from me and gave me something that I didn't want. I always say PMDD is like hanging out with that friend that you don't even really like, but they're always just there. And so, and it's like, you can't escape it. And so I'm like, cause it still is me, you know what I mean? So I can't really it's this foreign thing because there's glimpses of me in there, but it's not, the fatigue hits me very bad at the beginning of PMDD because it makes me doing the things that I do on a normal basis so hard, like going to work, and just, so on the civilian side, I'm a HR director, but I'm in the military as well. So I have a lot of physicality to my lifestyle. So now I need to get up and I need to work out and I need to do these things. And I feel like, how can I work out if I can't even I feel like it takes a lot to get out of bed, you know? Mm-hmm. And so for the rest of that cycle during PMDD, I'll have extreme fatigue. PMDD rage for me will normally be like around day 7 to 14. It'll start with irritability and then it'll increase to rage. It's like, okay, I'm a little irritated by the things that you're doing. And now, if you can't do them because they're so triggering to me where I feel like there's something in me that's telling me to react very irrationally, and it's almost like fighting with yourself. So if you're not very self-aware and you're not paying attention and you just react to what you feel, you'll go off, and that's where the big explosion is. But being that I try to manage it, I feel myself wanting to do these things, and I'm like, no, you don't want to go there, it's okay. But it's like you're fighting against another force inside of you, and you don't feel good until you explode in that PMDD rage, and then the rage kind of leaves. And then you're filled with this guilt and this shame of you're a horrible person. Look what you did. And it's like, I didn't want to do that in the first place.
Yeah. And so when you say day 7 through 14, you're talking about days 7 through 14 of your PMDD. So
yes,
7 through 14 exactly. Is the luteal phase.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay. So then what do you do to support yourself during this time? And obviously, you've gotten really good at you can say the exact day that it shows up, you've done that through tracking.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you feel anxiety coming up to your premenstruum? Do you get nervous knowing that PMDD is going to be there?
Absolutely, because some months are worse than others, which is very weird for me. That's the uncomfortable part about it, is that I get a lot of anxiety when I'm about to go into it because I don't know what it's going to bring. My symptoms are magnified in some months. And a lot of that is based off of the amount of stress that I have going on in my life. So I've done moving on months that I have big events going on. If I've had holidays and things like that where I have to do a lot of coordination and it's just really stressful at work or certain things, then that means my PMDD is going to be worse, right? So, but I just don't know on what scale and which symptom. For me, I have highlights. Every month, there's a highlight. And I'll oh, this month it's depression, because depression that'll be out of all the symptoms, that'll be the worst one for me. Mm-hmm. And so every month I have anxiety because I don't know which symptom is going to come to the forefront and take over my life, basically. And so it does make me feel very nervous because I like to prepare for things, and PMDD puts you in a place where you cannot necessarily prepare because you don't know how your body and your mind are going to show up during that time.
Talk about boundaries in your luteal. I'm assuming that that's really important when you it's always important, but when you have PMDD, knowing your boundaries in the luteal phase, how do you care for yourself in that way, and what recommendations do you have?
So I would say so I have an Instagram and I check in with myself daily and I kind of talk to everybody, okay, this is the day that I'm on. This is how I'm feeling. I have to check in with myself every single day to see what it is that I need. So I can't go off of what I needed on day 7 last month because it could be different from this month, because if I don't check in daily, I could be giving myself something that I don't really need, and so my partner used to always be so frustrated, and he used to be like, no, this time last month you needed this, and so I gave you this, and I'm like, I don't need that now, I need this. So I have to communicate those boundaries, and I do that by, I have a very structured morning routine, and I kind of do it whether I feel like it or not, because a lot of times I don't, but it gives me time, and I have to wake up earlier than my daughter. And I have this hour that is just for me. So the first thing I do is I hydrate myself, because I'm probably, if I have night sweats, I'm probably waking up dehydrated. That's very big for me. I'm so thirsty. I'm oh my gosh, I'm thirsty. I'm and I try to put some lemon in there, some, electrolytes. So I'm trying to refuel my body from what's been taken in the night. And then I have to get outside. So luckily I have my dog. I have my little Shih Tzu dog, Leo, and I'll go on a walk outside. Again, these are things that I would, if I didn't put this in place, I wouldn't normally do it. I would probably just stay in the bed. I go outside and that helps me, like fresh air, nature. Again, this is only 15 minutes. I'm going out to walk him.
Okay.
I work out from home a lot of times, so I'll move my body for 30 minutes. It doesn't matter. I don't put restrictions on, you need to weight lift, you need to do cardio, you need to do this. Like sometimes I'll be rollerblading. 30 minutes of movement for me gives me those endorphins, that energy, and it fights the fatigue. And it makes me feel like I'm in control of something. So like it shifts my mood. So although I know I have PMDD, I know my day could be horrible, but I can control how I'm feeling in this moment by doing this movement. And so afterwards, I feel like more powerful. I'm like, I can handle this thing. Like I can handle whatever PMDD is going to throw at me. And then I take about 15 minutes where I just jot down my thoughts, because a lot of times I'll wake up with a lot of negative, intrusive thoughts. They're lies. And if I go throughout my day believing those lies and acting on them, I'm going to cause a lot of damage in all of relationships. So I literally jot down, okay, what do you think this person is thinking? What are you thinking? Because when you have these intrusive thoughts, even with friends, like if a friend doesn't call you back and you have PMDD, you're like, oh, they don't like me. Like I must have done something like you'll start to think like that, and then you'll show up differently to your friend or your partner, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I just was doing something else. So I write down all of those thoughts, and then I observe them and say, is this true or not? Like yes or no. And then I think about, is the other person doing something that's proving that this is true? And if the answer is no, then that means this is a lie. This is not a real thought. So then I'm able to go throughout my day with a clear mind of what's true and what's not, so that I don't do damage and go in the wrong direction and regret it later on and feel like a horrible person.
That's so good. Like that is huge right there. You know, being able to discern truth and just like a flat out lie.
Yes, absolutely.
Is super important. Okay, what else? What else do you do?
So that's my morning routine. And then I go to work and I make sure that I check in with my partner, because a lot of times I have an avoidant attachment style. So I don't know. What that means is when I get into PMDD, I need more space, and I'm very introspective. You know, I'm not very, social. I kind of want to be to myself to kind of recharge myself, because I'm overwhelmed by all of the symptoms that I'm feeling. So I'm constantly trying to like make sure that I'm not putting myself out there in a way where I'm negligent, because I don't know if I could go off at any point, because I have to like stay to myself a little bit more. And my partner tends to feel really neglected during that time, because he has what we call an anxious attachment style, where when I get into PMDD, he wants to be closer to me because he feels me pull away. And he's needing that reassurance, that validation that I love him, that I care about him, that I'm still in this, because he feels like we're not connected, and he doesn't connect with who I am when I'm in PMDD. It's like he loves who I am when I'm in my follicular phase and I'm in my good days. When I get into PMDD, he's like, I don't really know, like, because it's very unpredictable, So I have to intentionally check in with him, right? And it's a very selfless thing that no matter how horrible I'm feeling, I have those connections with him where we'll just have a conversation, sit down and be like, how are you doing? What are you feeling? What are you needing from me? Because I have to kind of have a checklist when I'm in PMDD. So I can say, okay, you need this, this, and this today. And they're loving things. But if I don't have him tell me, then I probably won't do them on my own, because I'm so into myself. I'm so into my symptoms that it'll be easy for me to neglect my partner, because I'm just trying to manage my PMDD. So I make sure that I set time aside every single day. And I do the same thing with my daughter. So every relationship that I have, friends, doesn't matter, I just make sure that I intentionally connect with them, so that I don't do, it's 14 days. So I can't sustain any relationship without checking in with someone for 14 days and just completely neglecting them, because when I get out of PMDD, I'm going to want those relationships. I'm going to want to hang out. I'm going to want to talk to them. And if they're like, I haven't talked to you in 14 days, like, what? I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. Like, what are you talking about?
Kind of like you're burning your bridges, and then you got to repair them all. So how do you deal with the rage in all the relationships in your life, like with your partner, with your child, with coworkers, like clients? Like, how do you manage that? How do you get through it?
So all of these individuals, like you said, coworkers, child, they all trigger me. So that doesn't go away. And I always tell my clients when I'm working with them, I'm not a magical worker that can take away your triggers. Like, that's not going to go anywhere. It's just a matter of, like you said, managing it once you feel it. So you have to know what happens, number one, in your body. Again, this is different for everyone. What does it feel like in your body when you're first triggered? For me, I can literally feel a rush of anxiety so much that like maybe my hands will start to shake, or I'll get like really nervous. Like I can feel like a heating up in my body, and I feel myself wanting to initially react, right? And what I do is I have to getting outside is really good for me. And I've done this so many times, and luckily that's something that is acceptable. Like if you're, like if I'm in the house and I'm doing homework with my daughter, math specifically, because neither one of us are good at it. So we're like, what do I do?
That's a trigger for me.
They're like, what is the answer? I'm like, I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
And so I will go on a walk, and I just need to calm myself down, because what people don't understand is that emotions only last for 90 seconds. It's what you do that keeps that emotion going longer than that. And I feel like that first surge of feeling that trigger is about 90 seconds. If I can let that pass without reacting to it, my nervous system automatically calms down. I'll come back in the house, and then I'll be like, okay, let's work on this. And I have to do something within myself. So I have clients that need to connect to other people, other sources. I have clients that put their headphones on, right? They'll just go listen to music. Like they literally have basically I'm triggered playlist, right? And it kind of pulls them outside of reacting to it in the moment. And then it kind of resets them. And then they can go back to that person and be proud of themselves. And I always say, congratulate yourself every single time you felt the trigger, but you haven't reacted to it, because you begin to get that momentum. It's like, oh, I did it. Like, and then your mind and your body are going to want to have more and more of those experiences, versus you initially reacting and then you're regretting it and thinking that you're a bad person. So I immediately remove myself. I used to think I'm strong enough to stay in this moment and I can handle it. Like it's fine. I can stay in this moment. And like if I'm in an argument with my partner and he's triggering me, and instead of saying, oh, I need a moment, like, can you give me a moment? I would try to stay and listen to the continuous triggers, and it'll be like one after another. And then I exploded because I took too many triggers without removing myself. Like I couldn't take that much, but I was trying to prove, because you feel, when you have PMDD, you kind of feel like with your relationships, you want to feel like you're capable. And a lot of moms that I work with, they don't want to seem like a failure to their child. So they want to be super mom, and they want to think that they can do everything that they can do in their good days, that they can do them in their, PMDD days. And that's not a thing. And sometimes push yourself too far to where it's like, you know what, I'm going to explode. And then it's like, now I took on too much.
What about the times when you do explode?
So once I'm already triggered and I have exploded, this is what brought me to wanting to work on PMDD relationships, because I exploded on my current PMDD partner, my husband, and it was horrible. It was like, we talk about it on one of my podcasts, but it's like, I told him, we were coming from dinner, and I had listened to him at dinner. We were with my sister, and he was just saying a lot of things that I felt were like private things, like about our finances, just things that I'm like, because he's really open and social, and it's fine with him. And he's like, oh, we're family and stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, like, why are you saying this? And it was triggering me, because I felt like these were private things that he was sharing. And I wasn't okay with it. But I just, instead of like talking to him and being like, hey babe, like, let's not talk about this right now. I just like, no, I can take it. Like I let him continuously talk about it. And again, he thought it was nothing wrong with it. So he just kept going with it. And so we went to go walk to the car, and we were on such opposite sides of the spectrum. Like we're getting in the car, and he's like, that was a good dinner, huh, babe? And I was like, how dare you? And he was like, what are you talking about? And I went off on him because I didn't listen to the trigger. The PMDD rage was there, and you automatically look at that person like they're doing it to you on purpose. So that's the thing, is when you're getting triggered, it's the meaning behind what you think that they're doing. You think that there's like, I thought he was saying those comments to embarrass me, to like make me look bad, to like, like like he was disrespecting me because he didn't ask if he could share this. Like I was creating so many stories in my mind. So by the time the PMDD rage came, I had no remorse for my actions because I felt like you attacked me and now I'm going to attack you. Like it felt like a defense. And he was like, what are you talking about? And so we were driving and I said, get out. And he was like, what do you mean get out? I was like, get out of the car. And he was like we're on the road, like what are you talking about? He was like, you're acting crazy. And I was like, I'm not acting crazy. You are, because you did. And so I'm repeating the stuff that he did. And again, he doesn't know that he's done anything wrong.
Yeah.
Like, what are you so he gets out obviously he gets out the car because he's like, I don't even know what you're capable of at this point. It's scary.
Yeah.
Like, he gets out the car. I get in the driver's seat. I drive home and I call my sister and I tell her what happened. And sometimes when you're in that PMDD rage, you're feeling like you're justified. So you're talking to somebody else like, can you believe that they did this? And my sister was like, well, what did he think? You know, like she was like more rational about it because she was not triggered. And then she kind of talked me down. I was like, oh man, I see what you mean. And by that time he was gone because I kicked him out of the car.
Shoot.
I know. I was like, oh man. And so I remember breaking up with partners before, like, and it just being over. But this, I'm married. Like, that's not a thing. So I'm like, oh my gosh. Then there's that, you have really bad anxiety and guilt because you're like, oh my gosh, you're going to leave me. They're going to, they're not going to be able to handle this. They're going to think I'm crazy, like all of these things. And when we finally reconnected, it was like late that night. He had stayed out. Later, he called my brother-in-law to pick him up. He's like, I don't know what's going on, man. But she kicked me out of the car. And then whenever he said it to other people, they're like, no, she's so sweet. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'm trying to tell you, she kicked me out of the car. Like I wouldn't make this up. And so when we had a conversation and we really, because he didn't believe that PMDD was a thing, that I kept trying to tell him. And this is the hardest part, that they don't believe that it's true. They think it's like PMS, like, oh, you can control it. He kept saying, it's just something you can control. It's just uncomfortable. Like, and then he used to say things like, if you loved me enough, you would control it. And I'm like, my love for you has nothing to do with my PMDD and what I'm experiencing right now. Like, if I could control it, I would, because I'm suffering in other areas of my life. That if I could take this away, like I absolutely would, if there was a pill or like something that I could do. And I remember we had the conversation, and after that night, he said, okay, so PMDD is a thing. Like, that was the big where he was like, so what I say is, after you do the PMDD rage blow up, which happens all the, not all the time, but it like you'll have highlights where you remember in your PMDD journey, you've had PMDD rage, you've had a blow up, you have to take responsibility and ask for forgiveness. And it's really hard because by the time we were talking and on good terms again, I was taking responsibility for something that I didn't feel like I did because I was in my fit days. And so I'm looking back, I'm like, that's not me. Like, I wouldn't have done that. I'm pretty sure it wasn't that bad because I'm not associated with those feelings anymore. I don't even feel that anger. I don't feel justified in that. So when he's describing to me what I did and what I said, it's hard to apologize because I'm like, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure that's not what happened. Like, he's like, well, how did you get out of the car? It has to be very factual. How did I get out of the car? I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fair. And
wow. So yeah, like after it happens, like you really, like you said, you disassociate, and it's like, I want to talk about educating your partner, because like you just said, like your husband was like, you didn't really believe that it was a thing until he experienced it firsthand, getting kicked out of the car. So how do we, maybe somebody is dating somebody and it's starting to get serious and they want to tell them about it. Maybe they've been married for 20 years and you finally want to have a conversation. How do you recommend that we talk to our partners, maybe even our children?
So I'll start with children because it's more simple with children, where I remember when I first started the podcast like a year ago, and I talked about PMDD. My daughter didn't really know what it was, but she just knew that I talked about it all the time. Like, I don't know what she thought I was talking about because I would have client sessions and she's like, oh, PMDD. Like, I said something one day and I was like, oh, I'm so tired. And she's like, aren't you in that PMDD? Like, isn't that what?
I love it.
I'm like, yes, I am. And so and she has her cycle, and she's had it for a couple of years now. And there's a level of anxiety that comes with that, because I'm like, oh my God, like, I hope it's not hereditary. Like, I hope I don't lose her. I hope she doesn't experience this. But I had to take that away and separate the two, because her cycles are fine. She doesn't have it, and I don't want to project that this every woman has. Even the PMS, I would never want to, project that on her, because as she was initially getting her cycle, I didn't want her to think that, oh my gosh, this is going to be my life.
Right.
Because it would freak her out as like a young girl going through those changes, thinking, oh no, like my period's coming, like it's going to happen. And so when I talk to my daughter, I'm like, well, how is your cycle? Like, how's this going? And she's like, oh, it's not that bad. It's short. Like, the way I was like, that's good. Like, high five, like, good for you. Like letting her know that there's a difference between our cycles, and that I'm doing what I need to do to manage mine. And here's what you need to do to manage yours. So if she says she needs, she has cramps, I'm like, okay, you want to lay down? Like, do you need a little bit of medicine? Or like, I'm letting her know that you have to do what you need to do to manage your cycle, and I'll do what I need to do to manage mine, and that's okay. Yes. Don't have to look the same. And mommy's going to be over here managing hers, and she supports me. Like, whenever she feels like I'm in PMDD, she's like, oh, you need, like, she's very perspective. So she sees me downstairs, and she sees that I'm just like laying out. She'll give me space if she thinks I need it, or she'll ask me, hey, do you want me to do this for you? And so it's a matter of letting them know that it's not going to be the same, and we're all just supporting each other in our cycles. Yes. And then so she's understanding, like, if I can't do certain things, she's like, oh, okay, it's because you have the PMDD going on, and she knows it's temporary. So I always make sure I communicate with her and say, hey, I'm out of it. I'm out of PMDD. And we used to have like celebration parties, like when I was out, like little dance parties. I would put the music on, and she's like, yeah, like, you made it. Like, oh, that's adorable. And so with my partner, communicating it with him, when you're wanting to communicate with your partner, because I deal with a lot of clients that are dating, right? So they're like, I don't want to scare this person off, but I think they're a really good person for me. And I just don't want to come out the gate and tell them, I have PMDD, and then they run away from me. Yeah. So what I first say is, you need to know what your PMDD symptoms are. Know yourself first. And then I want you to think about, in the past, how have all of those symptoms that you have affected your relationships in the past? Because it's normally the same couple of, traits that you have during PMDD that are going to affect your relationships, and not all of them. Like, if I have night sweats or whatever, it doesn't trigger my partner that I'm like sweating, up a sweat. Like, yeah, he's over there just on logs. Exactly. So it's not like something where I have to feel bad about it, but if there's certain things like the irritability or me being really isolated. So think about your top 5 things that could possibly influence a partner. Mm-hmm. And then once you know what those things are, communicate the symptoms to your partner and say, hey, just so you know, after or before my cycle, these are the things that I go through. And then see if they can handle that. Like, be really upfront with them, because if they find it out and they don't want to, like, if they can't put their finger on it and they're like, there's something wrong with this person, like, they might just say, you know what, I'm out, because they don't understand it. And they'd be like, I can't deal with this. But if you're being upfront about it and you're like, hey, I have these couple of things, then when it happens, they'll be like, oh, I remember she told me about this. Yeah. Like, she told me this was going to happen. And then you let them know that you have a plan to manage it. So then they feel like it's something that they can accept because you're able to manage it. Not that you're putting it on them. Because a lot of my clients are like, my partner needs to do this, this, and this, and this, and this for me because I have PMDD symptoms. And so you're basically taking this load, this burden, and saying, here, you need to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And the partner is like, I can't do that. You know what I mean? Like, that's too much pressure for them. Mm-hmm. But if they think that you're taking on some of the responsibility, even if you just need them to do a couple things, but you're doing the bulk of it, they're okay with helping you out in your journey. But for you to just not take control and not do anything, a lot of partners won't accept that. So I say, just be upfront with what's really going to bother you and what's going to affect your partner, and then tell them what you're planning to do to manage it, and then ask for their help. So that way it's a collaborative thing, to where it's like we're both working on this together so that it doesn't do damage to the relationship. Mm-hmm. That's good. When you said, I hope this isn't hereditary, Yes.
You know, it made me think, like, is it connected to bipolar? Is it connected to any other or
that you have pre-existing, or that your parents had?
Yeah, just like the parents have, or both, like pre-existing. Like, did you struggle with depression or anxiety at all?
I have childhood trauma.
Oh,
and
yes.
So that for me, what I was noticing with the childhood trauma, so that's what I originally was going to get my doctorate in, because I thought I was suffering with childhood trauma every month. And I thought childhood trauma was the cause of my PMDD symptoms, because every month, and I still have to manage this, every month when I get into PMDD and I get really depressed, I start to think about my past and my childhood. Like, I grew up in foster care, and my parents, then I got adopted, then I got abused after I got adopted, and I had to live through that. And so I immediately said, oh, I'm having these issues because I had all of that childhood trauma growing up during my formative years. So this is why all of this stuff is happening to me. Like, there's that book where it's like the body keeps the score. So if you have all of this trauma going on, and I'm holding on to it, so that must mean I'm getting these symptoms. And it really is PMDD. But when you have pre-existing things, PMDD has a way of bringing it to the forefront. It's like, here's what your problems are. Like, if you have OCD, ADD, any of these other associating disorders, PMDD exasperates it. It magnifies it. It puts the flashlight on it, and to where you can't ignore it. So then you're like, oh man, I guess I have to deal with this, because your defenses are down. Like, when you're depressed, you don't have the ability to fight off these things or fight off intrusive thoughts. So you kind of just leave the door open for any pre-existing conditions or disorders that you may have. So I won't say that the other things cause it, but I would say that PMDD exasperates it.
Because I've heard of premenstrual exacerbation. So is that different?
Yeah, so PME is more like, I'm taking your PMS symptoms, and it's just magnifying them, but not to the point. It's like the middle ground.
Okay.
Like, think of it as PMS, PME, and then PMDD. Like, it's like an intense version of PMS, but not as bad as PMDD. So it's exasperating your pre-existing, PME exasperates your pre-existing PMS conditions or symptoms. Not all the childhood trauma, the ADD, whatever else, but just specifically with your PMS.
Okay. Yeah. And if you have been diagnosed with depression or anxiety, then that is exacerbated during.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you do to manage your PMDD? Like, do you do anything with nutrition or lifestyle? Have you found anything to be helpful? And have you found things that make it worse?
Yeah. I remember that when I was researching what to do, there was nutrition-wise, there were so many things that they were saying, take everything. Like, I thought I was just going to have to breathe air at one point, because I'm like, everything that, they were like, cut out the caffeine, cut out the dairy, cut out the alcohol, cut out the gluten, cut out, the carbs, cut out the sugars, and I was like, and I did it all, but for some reason, I've heard people say that it helps them, like certain things help certain people, but I was in such a deprivation that I was cutting out everything and still getting the symptoms. And I was so frustrated, because I'm like, I'm basically fasting because I'm scared. I now have an unhealthy relationship to food and nutrition, because I'm scared to put anything in my body, because I think it's connected to my PMDD. Like, this could be making PMDD worse, like, especially with dairy. I know so many people say my symptoms are so much better when I take out dairy, and I took it out and I didn't notice a difference. And then when I went to go want to have a piece of pizza, I now look at it differently, because I'm like, I don't know if this is going to cause my symptoms to be exasperated. Like, I don't know if I'm going to eat it. I already tested it out and seen that it had no effect over my PMDD symptoms. But it's like, when you start adding stuff back in, it's a mental game of like, trying to figure out whether it's healthy for me, whether it's not. For me, movement is best for me. I always say to my clients, movement is medicine for me. So moving my body is like my one fail, because I try to do holistic practices. Like I told you, I have such a sensitive system to getting medicines and things that I normally would get the side effects. I didn't want to go to the doctor and be put on medications, because I felt like What if I get put on this medication and I get these side effects, and then I have to get another pill to deal with these side effects, and then another pill to deal with the side effects for those side effects, and then
exactly.
I have a cabinet full of pills, and now I don't know who's the problem.
Right. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So I try to keep it holistic, and so I would say talk therapy has worked really, really well for me. When I do my coaching clients, I have to talk through everything, right? That helps me rationalize what's real, what's not. And I have to do that on a weekly basis for my clients. They come to me weekly to like, I'm thinking about acting out on this, but like, this is what I'm really feeling. And I'm like, okay, let's talk through this so that you don't do the damage. And then they feel better because they're getting it out, because holding it in never makes it better. Because if you're just left to your own devices and your own thoughts and it's just you, then you're like, I think it's true, but you don't have that outside kind of entity being like, no, because remember you said, and recognizing the patterns, because every month I was starting to have the same negative thoughts. Like, I think this, and it's like, no, remember you thought that last month, but that wasn't true. And it's like, oh yeah. So like, I used to journal, but I noticed I didn't really have time for journaling anymore. So I kind of took that away. And I got a voice recorder. I just ordered one off of Amazon. I already do the podcast. I'm already talking all the time, but I got the voice recorder so I could just talk out my thoughts, because I didn't want to talk them out to my partner, because I didn't want to unload on him some really heavy stuff. And he's a person where he likes to fix things. So if I'm unloading all this stuff on him, and he's like, well, why don't you try this? Or why don't you try that? And I'm like, no, that's not going to work. And then I notice I don't really need any feedback. I don't need for someone to fix it for me. I just need a sounding board. I just need to get it out.
Yes.
So that's a method for me. I will take the voice recorder, go on a walk, and I will just get everything out. And by the time I loop around and I make it back, I feel better. Because I can press play on that. I can listen to that again. And so a lot of my clients, they do journal because they like to do the writing and they like to do that. But I would say if you have an aversion to journaling, don't take it completely out and say, I don't need to get my thoughts out because I don't like to journal. Well, then use the voice recorder. Because I have a client where when she would get PMDD rage, she would say, I can't journal because I write so hard on the paper. Like I'm literally tearing up the whole notebook. Like that's how much she's feeling the rage. And then also, when you're feeling the rage, you don't feel like sitting still. All of this anxious energy. So you're like, I need to go. I need to move things. I need to be doing something. So the voice recorder is a really good method where you can just get it out. You're not going to be judged for what's said. And then you can press play and hear what you said and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I didn't say that to someone else.
Right.
Do damage, because now that I think about it and I'm hearing it, it's really not true.
That's such a great tip. Do you ever write this sounds a little weird, but do you ever write yourself notes or send yourself messages when you're in your follicular phase to the PMDD phase?
Yes. Yeah. So, and my partner does too. So this is something that we learned early on, and I keep it in my mirror. So I have a big mirror in my bathroom, and I have this picture frame, and it's this letter that he wrote me, and he hand wrote it, just telling me how much he loves me and adores me. He's very good at giving me words of affirmation. And that's my love language. And that's what always brings me back. Like it brings me back to the core of who I am. Even if I'm in PMDD, when I read something that he's written me, I soften up a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay. Like I am a good person, or I do love him, or he's not a bad person. Like whatever negative stuff I'm thinking, I read his words and it brings me back. It's kind of like the Notebook where he read to his wife and then she started to remember. So,
yeah. I love it.
So, he wrote the note, and so I have it in a picture frame, and I have to look at it every morning. So even in my good days, I still look at it, And we also do sticky notes. So this is something that I was doing before him. I actually had a mirror, like a closet mirror, and so for one side, I would have all these sticky notes, and I wrote I am, and then I had a whole bunch of things, positive things about me, and I put them on the mirror. They stayed on that side of the mirror. But I would wake up in the morning and I would pull one off and I would read it, and it would be like, I am smart, or I am beautiful. Just little things about myself that I started to doubt because I had PMDD, and because I was suffering, I started to, it was messing with my self-esteem. And so I kept those sticky notes on there. So behind the sticky notes, because there was like a whole floor to left mirror of the sticky notes, I could still see myself. So it was a way of seeing the words and then reflecting it to who I really was at my core. And I did that every single morning to train my brain of like, this is really who you are. Not what you're feeling in PMDD, not this horrible person, but this is who you are. And that was a daily reminder that I had to do, because I would start to get really, like you said, depressed and just feel horrible and start to question like my self-worth.
Yes, that's a great tip. Do you have any others for how we can separate like who we are from the diagnosis of PMDD, but of any diagnosis? You know, it's like, how do we separate ourselves from, like, you have PMDD. It's not who you are.
Exactly.
And so I don't know if you have any like advice or tips for how you can kind of put that separation there.
I would say the first thing to say is stop saying, because it's something that I used to say all the time. I was like, my PMDD, my PMDD. And when you take ownership of something, it kind of becomes a part of you. Totally. So I always tell my clients, PMDD is not who you are. It is what you are experiencing. So you experience it on a monthly basis, but it's not your identity, right? And so you have to have those things that remind you of who you are, what your accolades are like. So I would say, think about the top, like I would say 5, because I don't want to be overwhelming, but think about the top 5 accomplishments, things that you have, whether it's being a wife, a mom, a partner, whatever your profession is, like, remind yourself of who you are in those moments where you're not having to question, am I just completely this horrible person because of this action? Or am I really capable of being and doing so much more? And because I always have to remind my clients, like, you've had it for this amount of time and you've still been, operating like this did not take you out. It's not going to take you out. It doesn't have to control you. But you're almost more powerful, because not only are you doing these things on a day-to-day basis, but you're doing them in the midst of your suffering. So like, you should feel even more powerful, more capable, because it's not like other people are doing these things and they may say, oh, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to do this because I'm feeling tired or I'm feeling this. Like, you're doing it and you have PMDD or you have PMS or you have PME, like, you should feel like, I am a really like powerful, hardworking, capable person who's surviving this on a month-to-month basis, because even PMS, like, that's a month-to-month basis. So you have to give yourself some credit. And I feel like sometimes when we suffer with these things, we're very hard on ourselves and we think, I should be doing more, I could be showing up better. But just constantly remind yourself of how far you've come and how you're still going and all of the accomplishments that you've made in your life during that time.
So good. Do you think that a diagnosis of PMDD is necessary?
So PMDD is self-diagnosable. So basically, there's no test that the doctor can give you and the lab results are going to come back. I remember I did that. I was like, oh, let me get my hormones tested so I could see if I have PMDD, right? And I get my hormones tested and they're like, everything's normal. I'm like, no, it's not. Like,
no, it's not.
Nothing normal. And so when I realized it wasn't a hormonal imbalance, and I've had so many people DM me on Instagram and they're like, these are my symptoms, this. I think I have PMDD, and I can just look and see. I'm like, okay, did you track your cycle? So I'll tell them first, track it for at least 3 months, for consistency. Because like, you could have a bad month of PMS and then you could just be like, oh, maybe it's PMDD. And it's like, that may not be the case. And so you may just be having a bad, PMS month or PME or something like that. So where the next month you could be completely fine. And then it's like, you don't want to take on a diagnosis that you don't really have. That would be horrible. Like, living, you're like, I have PMDD, and you really don't. So I would say, don't try to grasp it if you don't have to, but you don't need, unless you're planning on getting some form of antidepressants or, even birth control, you can get that without having PMDD. That's not really like a thing. You can just say, I want to be on birth control. But I would say the antidepressants or whatever kind of medication like that, that's when I would feel like you need to have the diagnosis. But if you track your cycle for at least 3 months and you know that you're only having these symptoms during this particular time before your cycle, then you don't need to go to the doctor, because a lot of times, sometimes you'll be really frustrated, which is kind of depressing in itself, because you go to the doctor and they'll tell you, that you have, PMDD. And then you'll be like, okay, so what can you do for me? And then they say, oh, you can go on these antidepressants. And you're like, well, what if I don't want to do that? Like, what else can I do? And they're basically just going to tell you to just lifestyle changes. They're going to tell you to manage it. And managing it can look differently for different people. What works for me may not work for you. It's you experimenting with yourself on a month-to-month basis and seeing what works for you. It's getting into that sweet spot and saying, okay, like I told you, movement is medicine for me. Like consistently, I know if I move, I feel better. There's certain things that, like I said, when I was, because a lot of people will say, go on the keto diet or go on this kind of diet and then it'll help you. But your body's smart. It'll adapt to anything that you give it. So after a while, even if it does give you that form of relief, if you keep doing it, your body's going to adapt to it, then it may not work anymore. Body's going to be like, oh, keto, then you have to shock your body and switch it up. There's not a one thing nutritionally that your body is just going to say, this is one thing that's going to work for you the whole time, and then that's it, because your body's going to get used to it. PMDD is going to come back. Then you're going to be frustrated because you're living this life and you're like, how come I'm not getting the same results?
Okay. Do you have any other tips that you can share with women that think that they may have PMDD or know they have PMDD? Like, what are your best tips and tools for us?
I would say track your cycle. Don't think that your life is over because you have PMDD. I know when you're looking at the symptoms and you're thinking about, okay, how long do I have this for? And you're like, oh, until don't go worst case scenario, because if you look it up, they'll be like, okay, we'll just have a hysterectomy or oophorectomy where they take your whole uterus, your ovaries and everything, and then you'll be fine. Well, I've had a lot of clients go through that process and they didn't understand that there's a whole other laundry list of things that you have to deal with, getting on chemical menopause, the estrogen patches, all of these symptoms that you will have to deal with for the whole month versus just half the month. So don't try to go with quick fixes. So don't panic and kind of look at how to manage it. So that would be my tips, is start experimenting with what works for you, and don't try to just take the whole uterus and the ovaries and think that that's going to be okay, because you might be opening the door up for more suffering, and that's so, you don't want to do that. And then just communicate with your people that are around you and just let them know what it is, and then you're going to have to work with them on what works best with maintaining those relationships. Don't isolate yourself so much that you feel like, because I have PMDD, I can't have a relationship, I can't be a good friend, I can't be a good mom, I can't be like, don't put yourself so much in a box that where you're feeling like this is all I can be now is PMDD. Like, I guess I should just cancel out. I've had a lot of clients that have had like dreams of doing things in careers of, promotions and stuff, and they don't feel like they can take it. They're like, I can't take this promotion because I don't know if I'm going to drag it. You'll surprise yourself. You will surprise yourself at what you're able to put up with and deal with and manage. If you want to have a long-lasting relationship, like, you can have that. If you've had partners in the past that have not been able to accept your PMDD, or even I've had partners in the past that haven't been able to be with me because I have PMDD, and they're not a bad person. Mm-hmm. So I don't say blame it on everybody else. It's just some people can handle it and some people cannot. But if you've been going through different partners and they cannot, that doesn't mean that there's no one out there that can. Because when I met my partner and I saw that he was able to handle it as long as we were working on it, I was like, this is what I was talking about. So I would say, don't lose hope that there's a out there that can actually manage, and you'll feel completely loved and adored and not felt like this, broken little bird because you have PMDD.
Yeah, like, you are totally worthy of having a relationship and somebody that will love you and accept you, PMDD and all. Like, PMDD is just one part of the package, and it's not all of it. So so good, so incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your expertise. Will you share how women can connect with you and learn more from you?
Yes, so you can go to my website, www.inlovewithpmdd.com. I have a lot of resources on there. You can apply to work with me one-on-one. I just finished up my last round of my 2-month private PMDD coaching, where I'm working with couples individually and together, like I talked about earlier, and I'm opening up my next round to work with couples, whether it's you that wants to just work with me one-on-one on how do I manage my PMDD so it doesn't further damage my relationship, so we're not breaking up every single month, which is a common symptom of feeling like you have to break up with your partner. And then also you can follow me on Instagram at In Love with PMDD. And I actually go through basically a daily diary of my whole cycle from day 1 to 31 and then all over again. So you see what I'm like in my follicular days, what I'm like in my luteal days, what I'm like when I'm ovulating and I'm really all over the place and feeling good. So it's just a good representation, because I with that community, I have like people that are going through the same days with me, and they're like, I'm on day 7 too, and they're like, I'm feeling like this, and we're like, we got this. And so when we get into those moments where we're feeling down, we're also there like, I don't feel well, today sucked for me, and we're kind of like communicating, and I'm in my DMs at least 2 hours every single day talking with PMDD partners and just connecting and letting people know that they're not alone, they're not crazy, you know, and that there's support out there. Like, even if you don't work with me privately one-on-one, you can reach out to me on Instagram and really just have someone know what it's like to have PMDD and give you tools and, you know, things that you can use in your relationship and in your day-to-day life while you're managing it.
Yeah, community is huge. Just to know that you're not alone and there are other people that are walking the path with you. Yeah. It's huge. Last question, and I'm totally putting you on the spot because I didn't let you know I was going to ask this. How do you think that PMDD has made you a stronger woman?
PMDD has shown me that I am fully capable of not just loving others, but just loving myself and completely accepting myself and all of my flaws and giving myself grace. And I used to be so hard on myself, but like I said, I feel powerful in a way, humbly, like in a way of like, not only am I able to manage my PMDD symptoms, but I'm able to help others in the process. And PMDD has, whereas originally I felt like it was breaking me, I felt like it was building me up because it's putting me in a position to help other people. And I'm so grateful for it. So it's like this thing where people are like, oh, I'm sorry that you have PMDD. And it's like, there's a purpose to my pain. And when I recognized that, I said, this pain that I've been trying to get rid of, like in the beginning, I was like, I just want, take this away from me. I just want to get rid of it. But when I really think about it, if I would have gotten rid of all this pain, I never would have connected to the whole community of individuals that I'm helping. And so I always say, like, it's for a reason. Mm-hmm. And you can find something in your life that because you have PMDD, you can say, you know what, I'm able to help someone else. So when I take myself out of my own symptoms and look outwardly and say, how can I use this to help other people, then I don't look at it as like a bad thing. I look at it as this is my assignment. This is what I'm here to do. And I don't regret having it at all.
So good. Got goosebumps. I love it, Rose. You guys have got to connect with Rose and follow her. She has like the most beautiful smile. She's darling, and her stories that she shares, they'll help you so much, and you'll feel so connected to her immediately. Thank you so much, Rose, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope this PMDD episode helped you and your partner in your struggles within your relationship. And if this is something that you know that you need help with and you need further support, individualized support, make sure you're going to inlovewithpmdd.com and you're getting those private sessions to really work through what you're going through in your relationship, specifically in regards to PMDD. And also, I want you to leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcasts. What this does is it helps other PMDD sufferers and partners find this show that can help them get these free PMDD relationship tools. I remember what it felt like to not know that there were tools out there specifically for PMDD relationships. So I want to make sure that you are sharing these tools with others, share them on your social media, share them with people that you know that are also struggling in their PMDD relationships. Until next episode, this is Dr. Rose, your PMDD relationship psychotraumatologist. One more thing, I almost forgot. I now have the Fresh Start PMDD Partners workbook. What this workbook can do is, if you've had past traumatic experiences with your partner, past fights, past arguments, and they keep coming up every single month in PMDD, I created a Fresh Start workbook so that you can deal with all of the traumatic experiences that have happened in the past in PMDD rage and all of these things, so you can stop going through the same cycle again and again and again. So get that workbook. It comes with a video episode of the actual podcast that I recorded on getting a fresh start in your PMDD relationship, so you're not continuing the same cycle again and again and again. So make sure that you get that workbook. And if you need those individualized counseling sessions, you know where to go, inlovewithpmdd.com. Until next time, we got this. Love you.